Hello lovely people, another week, another wrap up. I've got a bunch of books to talk about. I'm just going to crack on with it.
Sophie Vlogs.
I'm going to kick things off with Melt My Heart by Bethany Rutter. I really liked this book. I picked this up on Oxfam online because I was like, oh, I know that the main character is bi and she's fat and this is like a summer romance, and that was enough to sell me on it. And I kind of went in just being like, oh, I'll just read like a light, fluffy summer romance, that'll be nice. And I got so sucked in and I had such a lovely time and I've ended up really enjoying it and I want to read more of Bethany Rutter's books. Lily is in that in-between stage before she goes off to university where she is waiting for her A-level results to find out if she can. She is very nervous about going to university because at the last minute she changed her plan and she is not going to the same university as her twin sister. She is going to a different one and she doesn't know if she wants to, but she's too scared about the whole topic, so she's avoiding it by doing a summer of new things. So she sets herself the goal that for summer she's going to do a new thing every day. She is working at an ice cream stand with her best friend Cassie, who is going to help her with this. One evening when Cassie and Lily are at the pub, they meet these two guys and she ends up having a relationship with this guy, but also maybe she's discovering that like maybe Cassie means more to her than she realised. It's a cute, fun, sweet summer bisexual romance. What more could you want? I had a lovely time. Things I specifically liked about this were, I felt like these teenagers felt very teenage in an authentic way, specifically in like the type of language and wording they were using, like the way they refer to things. Like, this is such a off the top of my head example, but like she refers to like being on someone's shit list and stuff like this. Like the types of slang and wording they use just reminded me of very similar language that like I used when I was a teenager. It felt very like authentic, like British teenager to me. I also really connected to a lot of Lily's struggles, I think, or rather I saw my younger self in them. So Lily is fat and she is totally fine with it, but sometimes other people and the way they talk about themselves or other people affects her. So she has some friction with her twin sister because her twin sister and the way that her twin sister talks about her own body makes Lily think, well, if that's what she thinks about herself, what is she thinking about me? And I've been in that situation. As someone who was larger than most of my friends, you hear people say things about themselves and you go, oh God, well, like, you're a size 12. Like, that's what you think about size 12s, what the fuck do you think about me? And a lot of this is very like body positive at its heart. And a lot of the characters in this, like, I love Lily's mum. Lily's mum is so great. She's like so affirming to her children. She like gives them space, but also isn't afraid to like drop the mum card if she needs to. So there was a lot of like real body positive heart at the center of this that is like constantly affirming that like it's absolutely understandable that Lily might feel this way because of this and this and this, but that's not a reflection of reality. And Cassie plays a big role in that, in the way that Cassie helps Lily when Lily starts to spiral and go down these things. And that was something that made me really root for them. Like, I'm trying not to give spoilers of how the plot goes, but I will say, like, I, from the start, had a sense of where this plot was going to go. I was like, I think I know how we're going to end up. But I really enjoyed the process of getting there because of all these lovely details, like how they felt to me, as well as seeing myself in like Lily's experiences with her body. I also did really see myself in her experiences of her realizing her bisexuality, like these moments when you're like, oh my God, have I been an idiot all of this time and I've literally never picked up on this thing that now feels really blindingly obvious to me. Been there, 100% yes. So there was a lot of those personal journeys she was going on that just felt very relatable to me and authentic and that kind of thing. There's also like loads of other things in this that were just like lovely details, like the place that they live had like a nice character to it. Both Lily and Cassie are artistic in their own ways, so this discussion of art and that kind of thing was lovely. And there's sort of a bit of like activism that runs through it, just like a little bit, not like a massive part of the storyline, but it underlies some plot points that I also really liked. And also Cal, who is the guy who Lily becomes involved with, like, God, I'm like, he's not real, but boy, that's such a nice person. this representation of a teen relationship that doesn't have to be like full-blown, oh my god, we're head over heels in love, or it could just be like two people who are like, you seem really cool, I like spending time with you, shall we go on a date? And it's just like, yes, great. So, for a book that I picked up because I was like, hey, I need more bisexual romances in my life, I just really thought it was lovely, and I would definitely recommend it. I'm going to alternate my fiction and my non-fiction this time, just because I feel like it. So, the next book I want to talk about is In the Kitchen, Essays on Food and Life. This is a selection of essays in the kitchen. I picked this up because I really like Ruby Tando and Ella Risbridger. They're two of my favourite food writers. They've contributed to this. As expected, loved both of their contributions. The other side of wanting to pick this up was I wanted to discover more food writers who I don't know that I can read. I found it really funny because there were a couple of other writers, specifically Yemisi Arabisala and Nina Minya Powell's. I was like, God, I loved their ones. And I went and I googled them and I realised that both of their books are already on my Goodreads to read list, which just means that I actually have to buy them and read them. So like that was just wonderful. Like I wanted to come out of this with like 5 more books that I want to read, and I have done that, which is great. As a collection, I thought it was really interesting because for food writing, it is very much in the kitchen and essays on food and life. It's not all explicitly about food. I really enjoyed some of the ones that were sort of doing angles where I was like, oh, I don't think I've ever really read anything like posited from this view. Like one person very early on traces their life through the cookers that they've had. Another person who contributed to this is works for a massive publishing company in their imprint that does like recipe books and cookbooks and that kind of thing. And she was just talking about how she got into that role. And that was like super fascinating. There's like a funny one that's like looking at like buffets. There's so many different things explored in this. There's essays that are really grappling with like colonialism and food, and then there's essays that are like looking at like proper heartbreak and grief and processing grief through cookbooks, and I just loved it. I had a wonderful time. It was everything I wanted it to be. Even if like not all of these 100% worked for me, there were enough that I really connected to that I'm like, this is a good collection. I would recommend this to people. So really, really enjoyed this one. The next fiction book is Sword of Fire by Katharine Kerr. Bet you thought you'd heard the last of Katharine Kerr on my channel, didn't you, when I finished off that Devery cycle? This is her new release that was released in 2020. This is set within the world of Devery that I have talked about previously in my other many book chats when I was reading through the Devery cycle. However, if you've never read any of that series, it doesn't matter. This is set 300 years after that series, so it is set in Devery, which is this Celtic-inspired fantasy world. This was interesting because the thing about the Devery cycle is the 15 books, I read them, they're all like looking at like past lives. So you have multiple timelines in each book. You're like looking at like a contemporary storyline, but then also these past lives and how they affected that. This does not do that. Instead, this kind of functions around like a legal dispute, which was interesting because it's completely different. So when you start off, we are in this town, you're following Alyssa, and Alyssa is a scholar. There is this particular like place of learning which is specifically for women who are scholars, and that was fantastic. There were so many cool women in this book, and there were cool women in the original Devery cycle. It's just they were not always the like majority of the cast, whereas in this they really are, and I really liked that. So where this starts, a bard has just died of a hunger strike because the bards and the scholars are trying to get justice and call attention to the fact that essentially the law courts are corrupt because they are watched over by the lords, and if anyone tries to bring a suit against the lords, obviously the lords rule in their own favour. So the main plot of this follows Alyssa and the Silver Dagger, who is essentially like an outlaw who is like paid to help her, as they journey to this place to find this book that they hope will have evidence of this thing they can use as a legal precedent, and then it sort of climaxes around like this kind of hearing in the law courts. And it was interesting to read something different from Katharine Kerr to the original big series I read. The problem is I personally was not really invested in that as a concept. Like, if you say to me, is it important to have freedom in your courts to be able to hold people in positions of power accountable? Yes, I theoretically would be very interested in a plotline that explores those things. Something about the execution of this just didn't super make me interested. And I think it's partly just because we spend like a lot of time journeying. Alyssa and Cavan spend like a lot of time journeying, and they have like a romance that essentially I don't care for Cavan. That's what we come down to. Because Cavan, to me, if you've read the original Devery cycle, feels like a Hrodry 2.0. He's like, was noble born, thanks to some shenanigans on a relative's part, gets cast out and is now like, I have no honor. And he just like constantly is like doing not like other girls to Alyssa, where he's like, I've never met a woman as intelligent as you. And she's like, thanks, I go to an entire school's worth of women who are as intelligent as me. So like, it's very much him. Like, he is a character who has his own biases and prejudices because he has grown up in like a noble setting. And in some ways the text is like pointing that out to you and being like, he's an idiot, look at all these cool women, they're just like suffusing the text. It's just he did also annoy me, so therefore I wasn't rooting for this relationship between them. And something else that I think I've realised about Katharine Kerr's books is that oftentimes I just wish they were shorter. Which is not what you want to be, is it? So I do think if this had been a bit shorter, I would have been more invested in this sort of like legal battle type thing. Some other good stuff is like, I have mentioned there are some really great female characters in this, like the Ramatha was great. Also, like, if you, like me, have read the original series, there are some lovely little, like, nods to things and moments of things that they make no difference if you don't pick up on them. It doesn't affect the story in any way, but it is nice, and you're like, hey, hi, I see you. So it's one of those where I didn't dislike the reading experience of this. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I just don't know if I'm actually going to continue this trilogy. I don't know if I'm invested enough to do so, which is a bit of a shame, because I have read 15 other books by this woman. I'm just not sure if this is the one for me, to be honest with you. But I would really love to hear from you if you've read this. Especially, I would love to hear from you if you've read this and you've never read any Katharine Kerr before. How did you find it? But then also, if you, like me, have read the original Devery cycle, how did you find this one? I, in many ways, respect returning to the world and doing something completely different. I think that's fabulous. It didn't wholly work for me, is what it is. A tiny tack onto the end of that is I also reread Daggerspell, which is the first book of the Devery cycle, because I did a podcast with my friend Mark. We have a podcast called You Know What I Like, ... where we take it in turns to pick something that we like, and we get the other person to like consume some of it, and then we have a big chat about it. So I will leave a link to that podcast episode down below. We talk about the whole cycle. We do talk about this book, but we also talk about the other 15 books. There are spoilers, so only give it a listen if you don't mind having things spoiled. But it was fun to do, and I just wanted to mention that I reread Daggerspell for that because it was interesting, because I did notice things that tie in to the end of the series in like a Celtic loop manner, which is something that I knew that she had planned, but it was interesting to get. Again, I do think that book could have been a lot shorter as well. I think maybe that's just how I feel about Katharine Kerr. The final book I want to talk about is Spider-Woman's Granddaughters, Traditional Tales and Contemporary Writing by Native American Women, edited by Paula Gunn Allen. I thought this was fantastic. I thought Paula Gunn Allen did a brilliant job of putting this together. She does an introduction which was really insightful, especially for someone like me who is coming in. I don't know a lot about Native American narrative traditions or the types of stories that are specific to different tribes, that kind of thing. And she did a really great job in the introduction of sort of unpacking where Western readers usually struggle when they come to Native American literature, because they expect X, Y, and Z, but Native American literature is doing its own thing, and these are the types of things it prefers to explore, and that kind of thing, which was super insightful. And then this is split into 3 sections. So it's split into the warriors, the casualties, and the resistance. And she's very carefully curated it, and I thought she did a really great job of curating it. So within each section, before every piece of writing, she writes like a mini introduction. And those were also so insightful because, like, the warriors section, all of the texts in that section do feel like they're in conversation with each other around this theme. And in her little introductory passages, she's sort of giving you the information you might need to be able to really get that message and explore that theme. Like, if she's, for example, she'll include like a traditional tale, and then she will follow it up with a contemporary piece of writing that is engaging in that tradition, or that is like re-envisioning that tradition within like a contemporary context, that kind of thing. So I just felt like she did a great job because everything flows really well into each other. They inform each other. They create this conversation as you read. There were a lot of stories in this that I found so compelling and beautifully written. There were writers in this, kind of similar to with In the Kitchen, there were a couple of writers in this which I particularly enjoyed, so I was like, oh, I'll look at what else they've written. And again, like Linda Hogan, already on my to-read list apparently. So again, this is just a case of like, it's put on my radar some authors that I do want to prioritise getting some of their stuff so I can read more of them. But on the whole, I thought it was a really great collection. I would really recommend it. So, those are all the books I wanted to talk about this week. As per usual, have you read them? Do you have thoughts? Would love to hear them. I feel like this has been a long book chat, so I will draw it to a close. But yes, I hope you're having a lovely day. I will see you next time with something different.